I will do reading and writing. So I'm usually working on a book at any given time.
You shut off the rest of the world?
Yes. So I put some music in my ears, usually Brahms or Bach, sometimes Beethoven or Mozart. It's those four. It's usually those are on rotation.
No rap.
No rap. Despite my extraordinary rendition of WAP, I am not in fact a rap fan.
Do you still hate WAP? The song?
It's. I will say I do not think that it is the peak of Western civilized art.
Okay.
I don't think that 100 years from now people will be gluing their faces to a WAP and protest at the environment.
But Brahms and the rest will be still around.
Yes. I would assume if people still have a functioning prefrontal cortex and any sort of taste.
Strong words from Ben Shapiro.
All
right. So you got some classical music in your ears and you're focusing. Are you at the computer when you're writing?
Yeah, I'm at the computer. Usually we have a kind of a room that has some sun coming in, so it's nice in there, or I'll go up to a library that we just completed for me. So I'll go up there and I'll write and read.
With physical books?
Yeah, I love physical books. And because I keep Sabbath, I don't use Kindle. Because when I'm reading a book and it hits Sabbath, I have to turn off the Kindle. So that means that I have tons and tons and tons of physical books. When we moved from Los Angeles to Florida, I had about 7,000 volumes. I had to discard probably 4,000 of them. And then I've built that back up now. So I'm probably going to have to go through another round where I put them somewhere else. I tend to tab books rather than highlighting them because I can't highlight on Sabbath. So I have like the little stickers and I put them in the book. So a typical book from me, you can see it on the book club, will be like filled with tabs on the side, things that I want to take. Now, actually, I got a person who I pay to go through and write down in files the quotes that I like from the book. So I have those handy. So which is a good way for me to remember what it is that I've read, because I read probably somewhere between 3 and 5 books a week, and then in a good week 5, and then I write, I read, and then I go pick up my kids from school at 3:30. So according to my kids, I have no job. I'm there in the mornings until they leave for school. I pick them up from school. I hang out with them until they go to bed, which is usually 7:30 or so. So I'm helping them with their homework, and I'm playing with them, and I'm taking them on rides in the brand new Tesla, which my son is obsessed with. Mm-hmm. And then I put them to bed, and then I sit back down. I prep for the next day, go through all those media sources I was talking about, compile kind of a schedule for what I want the show to look like, and run a show. It's very detail oriented. Nobody writes anything for me. I write all my own stuff. So every word that comes out of my mouth is my fault. And then, hopefully I have a couple hours or an hour to hang out with my wife before we go to bed.
The words you write, do you edit a lot? Or does it just come out, you're thinking like, what are the key ideas I want to express?
No, I don't tend to edit a lot. So I thank God I'm able to write extraordinarily quickly. So I write very, very fast. In fact, in a previous life, I was...
You also speak fast, so it's similar.
Yeah, exactly. And I speak in paragraphs. So it's exactly the same thing. In a previous life, I was a ghostwriter. So I used to be sort of known as a turnaround specialist in the publishing industry. There'd be somebody who came to the publisher and says, I have 3 weeks and to get this book done, I don't have a word done. And they would call me up and be like, this person needs a book written. And so in 3 weeks, I'd knock out 60,000 words or so.
Is there something you can say to the process that you follow to think? Like how you think about ideas? Like stuff is going on in the world and trying to understand what is happening. What are the explanations? What are the forces behind this? Do you have a process or just you wait for the muse to give you the interpretation of
Well, I mean, I think that I don't think it's a formal process, but because I read... So there's 2 ways to do it. One is sometimes... sometimes the daily grind of the news is going to refer back to core principles that are broader and deeper. So I thank God, because I've read so much on so many different things of a lot of different point of views. Then if something breaks and a piece of news breaks, I can immediately sort of channel that into, in the mental Rolodex, these 3 big ideas that I think are really important. And then I can talk at length about what those ideas are, and I can explicate those. And so, for example, when we were talking about Musk taking over Twitter before, and I immediately go to the history of media, right? That's me tying it into a broader theme.
Yeah.
And I do that, I would say, fairly frequently. We're talking about, say, subsidization of industry, and I can immediately tie that into, okay, what's the history of subsidization in the United States, going all the way back to Woodrow Wilson and forward through FDR's industrial policy, and how does that tie into sort of broader economic policy internationally? So it allows me to tie into bigger themes, because what I tend to read is mostly not news. What I tend to read is mostly books. I would say most of my media diet is actually not the stuff. Like that's the icing on the cake, but the actual cake is the hundreds of pages in history, econ, geography that I'm social science that I'm reading every week. And so that sort of stuff allows me to think more deeply about these things. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is Russia breaks in the news. I don't know anything about Russia. I immediately go and I purchase 5 books about Russia and I read all of them.
Mhm.
And so one of the unfortunate things about the fortunate thing for me and the unfortunate thing about the world is that and the unfortunate thing about the world is if you read 2 books on a subject, you are now considered by the media an expert on the subject. So that's, sad and shallow, but that is the way that it is. The good news for me is that my job isn't to be a full expert on any of these subjects, and I don't claim to be, right? I'm not a Russia expert. I know enough on Russia to be able to understand when people talk about Russia, what the system looks like, how it works, and all of that, and then to explicate that for the common man, which a lot of people who are infused with the expertise can't really do. If you're so deep in the weeds that you're like a full-on academic expert on a thing, sometimes it's hard to translate that over to a mass audience, which is really my job.
Well, I think it can actually, it's funny, with the 2 books, you can actually get a pretty deep understanding if you read and also think deeply about it. It allows you to approach a thing from first principles. A lot of times, if you're a quote unquote expert, you get carried away by the momentum of what the field has been thinking about, versus like stepping back. All right, what is really going on? The challenge is to pick the right 2 books.
Right. So that usually what I'll try to find is somebody who knows the topic pretty well and have them recommend, or a couple people and have them recommend books. So a couple of years ago, I knew nothing about Bitcoin. I was at a conference and a couple of people who you've had on your show actually were there. And I asked them, give me your top 3 books on Bitcoin. And so then I went and I read like 9 books on Bitcoin. And so if you read 9 books on Bitcoin, you at least know enough to get by.
Yeah.
And so I can actually explain what Bitcoin is and why it works or why it doesn't work in some cases and what's happening in the markets that way. So that's very, very helpful.
Well, with Putin as an example, that's a difficult one to find the right books on. I think The New Tsar is the one I read where it was the most objective.
The one I read, I think, about Putin was one called Strongman. And it was very highly critical of Putin, but it gave like a good background on him at the very least.
Yeah, so I'm very skeptical of sort of things that are very they're critical of Putin. Because it feels like there's activism injected into the history. Like the way The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich is written about Hitler, I like, because there's almost not a criticism of Hitler. It's a description of Hitler, which is very, it's easier to do about a historical figure, which with William Shirer, with The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, it's impressive because he lived through it. But it's very tough to find objective descriptions about the history of the man and a country, of Putin, of Zelensky, of any difficult. Trump is the same. And I feel like
everybody that's the hero-villain archetype, right?
Yeah.
And it's like either somebody's completely a hero or completely a villain. And the truth is, pretty much no one is completely a hero or completely a villain. People, in fact, I'm not sure that I love descriptions of people as heroes or villains generally. I think that people tend to do heroic things or do villainous things. In the same way that I'm not sure I love descriptions of people as a genius. My dad used to say this when I was growing up. He used to say they didn't believe that there were geniuses. He said he believed that there were people with a genius for something. Because people, yes, there are people who have very high IQ and we call them geniuses. But does that mean that they're good at EQ stuff? Not necessarily, but there are people who are geniuses at EQ stuff. In other words, it would be more specific to say that somebody is a genius at engineering than to say just broad spectrum they're a genius. And that does avoid the problem of thinking that they're good at something that they're not good at, right? It's a little more specific.